Dana White talked about signing Jake Paul, and he said he found it intriguing. I've never heard Dana use that word before. And it was all the language that Dana used. He said it's intriguing. Prior statements, it was no way, never going to happen, right? Jake Paul and Dana had this big back and forth. Now, Dana should talk about the concept, and he did take a victory lap in saying Jake Paul wants to fight here. He says that we don't pay very well, but of course he wants to fight here because we pay the most. But that was it. We didn't have very much information. What would you guys do? What would you predict? And it's a tough matchup. In all fairness, it's a tough matchup because Jake Paul fighting is the allure, not who Jake Paul fights. Like, it's not opponent-based. It's not championship-based. It's not ranking-based. It's the fact that he's going out and doing it, but he's in a really interesting spot. Like, I really respect the skills of Jake Paul, and I appreciate and I acknowledge that he's a badass, whether you want that to be a true statement or not. He is. Being interested in what he's going to do next is a totally different conversation. There is a phenomenon between Jake and boxing, but this model has changed greatly. Like the Paul brothers, now we're discussing Jake specifically, but in a broad stroke, the Paul brothers, somebody that's really famous at something, deciding to box against another really famous guy at something, and bringing those communities together and agreeing to do it in the squared circle. Like, this is what this whole premise was about. It was basically celebrity boxing. Jake, like many people that come before him, is a victim in some degree of his own success. It turned out he was really good at it. He was a lot better than other people. He started getting platforms and mediums and making statements where other celebrities realized, I can't go in and do this with him. He's tougher than your average celebrity. He's tougher than the other guys on YouTube. He's tougher than the other guys in music. He's tougher than the other guys in the NBA. Well, who do you put him with? So then the world pushes back and says you put him with an actual boxer, to which he says, okay. Now they bring in Will Fury, and I mean, there's a little bit more to it, but you were attempting to at least satisfy the voices that were the loudest in the room that said, get him in there with another boxer. That was never what the experiment was about. Now, that is what it turned into. I fully acknowledge Jake did turn out to have some real skills, and he did want to actually show those skills off, and he actually wanted to get notoriety for it. But he's still in an interesting position. There's a way to work through this. Jake's worked through everything. I trust he'll work through this one. I'm just sitting back to observe it because I will be curious how he solves this problem. Whatever Jake does next, as opposed to the past where he just had an opponent from some walk of life that brought an audience, versus his new walk of life and his massive audience. Instead of doing that, Jake is going to need an actual partner. Somebody that can do their end of it. Somebody that can match him in headlines. Somebody that can get the intrigue of the audience and moreover the media prior to the contest so that it can be a profitable night of business. So if Jake was to leave boxing, which I don't think he should do, and I happen to believe that he's probably pretty damn good at MMA. I saw him play with MMA a number of years ago against AJ Agazarm, but it was an all-ground battle. That's out there on YouTube. You guys can go look it up. AJ Agazarm was second in Abu Dhabi. He was meaningfully outsized, and he was getting new into MMA himself, and AJ even won this contest if you wanted to score it. Either way, I do believe that Jake would pass the test and that you all would respect him as the badass that I claim that he is if he went to the world of MMA, but that's not what this is about. He doesn't want to take on a full schedule. He doesn't want to take on 3 fights a year. He doesn't want to become a contender. He's not making a 5-year commitment to it that I'm aware of. And his brother Logan talked about, when it was Logan personalizing this, saying that he would like to do an MMA fight. He wants the size advantage. He'll trade his size off for the experience and skill set of an opponent. He specifically said Patty the Batty. Now, that's never in a million years going to happen, but I still get it. I get the concept that Logan was talking about, and I happen to like it. That is actually pretty interesting. Who would win that? The athleticism and the size and the in shape and the gritness of Logan versus the skills and experience of Patty the Batty. Like, it is a somewhat interesting plan. Dana's just not going to do it because it's not sustainable. It's not something he can do once and then do it again 7 days later and do it again 7 days after that. It's just not the business that Dana does. So what would you do with Jake? What would you do? We've seen this tested. Should we turn to history? What about the time that James Toney was going to come over? We put him with the heavyweight champion of the world to make sure what we deemed as an outsider, meaning James Toney, was not going to walk into our apparatus known as the Octagon and get a W. We put him with the best in the world, Randy Couture. Is that the situation you do? Or does it get more of like a CM Punk treatment, where CM Punk had not had a lot of experience? He had some expectation. He had some rumors coming from the gym. So they brought in a guy who also didn't have a ton of experience and then let them go out there and have their fun. I mean, in all fairness, there's a couple of ways to skin this cat if, in fact, we are going to do it. And Dana saying he found it intriguing means something. Is Jake even able? Is he even eligible? Is Jake willing? Is Jake under contract right now? I'm going to assume that he's not, because Jake has made those kind of comments in the media. The whole reason Dana had to ask about, Dana didn't bring this up. Somebody else brought it up to Dana, but he responded. He said it was intriguing. And you know what? It is intriguing. He's right. It is interesting. But what does the schedule look like? What does the opponent look like? And let's not ever forget, it's not about how well Jake can fight. That's not what the allure of that's going to be. It's going to be the fact that Jake is fighting. So who's the opponent and who can match him? It starts to get very interesting. Can you bring in an outsider like this and put him in on pay-per-view points? Sure. Do anything you want. Write the contract up and do it. And if you're not willing to do that, you're probably not going to get him. So just how intriguing is this, right? Like, there's a lot of conversation left to be had. The very first thing, your very first step into getting into the Octagon is if you can get the boss to tell you no. That's step number one. Nobody has ever come in from the outside who didn't start with being told no. Now we've gone from no to it's intriguing. So is this a possibility? If so, and you were in charge, what would you do with it? What weight class would you do it at? Who would you put Jake against?